Welcome back, everybody. This week we're going to talk about the security manager and external relationships. Primarily, we're going to talk about the relationship with local police, and that can be a very valuable relationship for you. It can also be one that's very dangerous for you. And what we're going to really talk about are the models of interaction, what police think of security, and how, in most cases, the police believe they should interact with security. And there are different models of interaction. There are different models of how they believe we work and how we believe they work. That makes for a very interesting dynamic. And in the end, what I'd like you to do is to think about what model you think you would like to operate in if you were a security manager, and based on different types of interactions with police. So besides local police, there are other important contacts or relationships. And I don't want to use the words interchangeably necessarily, because relationships are more deep than just a contact, but they're often referred to as your contacts. So we'll use that term because it's a term that's used in industry. But besides the local police, Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. has proved to be a very valuable contact for security managers and private corporations. DHS has expanded now to cover just about every type of industry and commerce that you can think of. And therefore, when you can find the right person in DHS that relates to your industry or type of commerce, you've found a very valuable contact in someone that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can work with to get intelligence information, and really make your job more fruitful and actually help them as well. There are certifying agencies, and if you think about a certifying agency, let's just say you work in a medical center, the hospital certification corporation, whatever that might happen to be, would be someone that you want to interact with, right? They probably have a security arm, and you would want to interact with them, as well as fraternal organizations. And for private security, it's normally ASIS International, but there are others, and those fraternal organizations oftentimes write standards, write procedures that you can use and standardize your operation along with others, and then you have some legal grounds for them. Local planning and ordinance officials are important to you because in some cases you may want to put up a fence, or you may want to chop down some trees so that you have a clear vision to your line of defense in the back of your facility, let's say. And you're going to need to know those local planning and ordinance officials in order to have those conversations. In some cases, it's good to make those contacts early. Then, of course, other law enforcement organizations, the FBI, Department of Natural Resources or Conservation, depending on which state you're in. I use the DEA and FDA quite a bit. Could be the FAA, which I've also worked with for private aircraft, Health and Human Services. There's just a number, and any government organization, frankly, especially at the federal level, will have a security arm of some kind that it is good for you, especially based on your industry, to get to know. So if you're going to work with the local police, let's talk about what the local police think of you just out of the chute. Now, we did some reading this week, and you noticed that it was not the most confidence-building reading when it came to police interaction with security. Most police think that security swims in a separate lane than they do, and there is no synergistic relationship between the two. There is no reason for security to help the police. Now, maybe I shouldn't say it that way. They see that we should help them in just about every case, and 9 in 10 believe that business needs to share more information with the police. What police don't necessarily feel, based on the survey that was done in that first reading, is that they probably don't need to share as much with us. So there is this lopsided belief in information sharing and in helping the other side, and a lot of that's based on professionalism. The indication is that police believe that security personnel are poorly trained, poorly motivated, and don't have the motivation to do the job as a police officer would. And in some cases, that is true. But if anyone listening to this can tell me they have never met a lazy police officer, and anyone in police department can tell me that, then they will lie to us about other things as well. So it is really a two-way street. And what was really interesting was only 4% of the police that were interviewed believed that private security was essential partners. Now, if you think about that in terms of a person's lifetime, of the 168 hours in a week, 40 of those are spent on the job normally. So that's a quarter of our lives. And a quarter of our lives is, and if you look at it that way, another quarter of our lives or more is spent sleeping, right? Where we're probably not getting into much trouble. So if you look at it, it's about a third of our lives that we spend, waking hours that we spend on the job. And during that third, we're very active. And so we do a lot of things. We practice a lot of behaviors during that third that might be very interesting to a policeman in the course of an investigation. Yet they don't believe that private security would be an essential partner. And I find that to be kind of ironic. When you're trying to investigate a crime and you have a suspect, you would probably want to get to know that suspect as best you can. And what they're doing during 1/3 of their waking hours is under the purview of private security normally, that would have records on their behaviors. I would think that you would find that to be an essential partner. Also, anecdotally, although I'm sure this can be proven in any number of ways, most police officers aspire to work as security managers when they retire. I will also tell you that I have met many, many of them who will admit that they work much harder as a security manager than they ever did as a police officer. Maybe the hours might be better and the pay is certainly better, but in most cases they assume that it's a retirement job, and it is certainly not. And again, a number of people that I know that have spent years working as police officers and in federal service really do get a surprise when they come into the private sector. So for a group that the police don't tend to trust based on the stats that we read in that first article, and the stats are the stats, right? I mean, that's data. They certainly do want to join the profession. So I find that to be somewhat ironic. Maybe they think they can save us. I don't know. But I think the draw primarily is financial. But it is interesting to say that when you think about what the survey told us about what police think of security, the fact that they want to become security managers at some point really is indicative of the dichotomy there between the data and actual outcomes, at least in the course of a police officer's career. So Saria and Presler show us a very interesting set of models about how police and security see each other and how they might work together. And these different models aren't the only ones, and there are hybrids and certainly, you know, go-betweens and in-betweens on all of these. But for the most part, these give us a pretty good indication of how police departments would like to work with security departments. And I would like to turn that in our discussion to how you might want to work with local police. And normally when a security manager meets with local police for the first time, the police department will start to set that model. You know, this is what we can do for you, this is what you can do for us. And I think if you have that script in your hand before you get there, in a very positive way, I think you can set the model a little better right out of the chute. A lot of it has to do with the police department you're dealing with, but these models, they convey a symbiosis, a working together in various degrees, and they move along a power spectrum where the police have all the power and the security person is basically subordinate and subservient, and to where they're more equal sharing. I don't know whether there's a really private dominance, although I'd like to say in some of these models I sense that a little bit, at least in some of the language. But for the most part, it's a police dominance toward a equal sharing kind of a model. But you have to remember, based on the research, that, and this is from the second article, from the Saria and Presler article, that the relationship between police and private security has been patronizing, if not suspicious, and antagonistic. That was Brody's research of interviews with police departments. So again, you're starting with a model of, I'm going in to meet with someone who doesn't think much of me and doesn't really trust me. And you're going to set an operating model so that you can do your job well and they can do their job well. So let's look at the different models and kind of break them down. So I think the easiest one is the property model. It came first, and I think it is the easiest one. It's just based on place of operation. The police work in public spaces, and private security works in private company spaces. And that's easy. And I think for the most part, that's how most people see the split. One is hired by a private company, corporation, organization to protect their private property, and the other is hired by a municipal entity, normally, to protect the people of a city, county, state. And that makes for a really easy model to operate. You stay in your lane, I'll stay in mine. You take care of your stuff, I'll take care of mine. But that's not reality, because there are many privately owned public accessed areas. Think about shopping malls, movie theaters. You have a festival on private land or in a private place. There are many, many places that are open to the public that are owned privately. And to suggest that the police would not go into those areas in the event of an incident is ludicrous, and to suggest that the police should protect those areas the same way a private security organization would is ludicrous. So the police are not going to set up cameras and lock the doors at the shopping mall at the end of the day and, drive around the parking lots with their little light on the whole time. At the same time, the private security person is not going to respond to a robbery downtown. But there are places where both need to operate in a cooperative relationship. And so the defined boundary, theory says there's little overlap, but that's just not so in so many places. So I'm not sure the property model really, although it's the one that most people would think of. Private security takes care of private places, and public security or public police take care of public places. But it's just not so because of those crossover spaces, of which there are many. So one of the other models of how police and security work together is the division of labor model. And they both sort of serve crime prevention functions, but police use deterrence, incapacitation, arrest, seizures, those legal remedies to prevent crime, where private security uses preventative presence and specialized tools, cameras and locks. And the fact that there's a guard in a bank. If you've gone to a bank branch recently, some of them have an armed guard and some of them do not. And those that do have a less chance of being robbed, and that is statistically proven. That guard, you see it on TV shows all the time, is always depicted as a 90-year-old man with a rusty .38, leaning back in a chair, half asleep or totally asleep. That's not necessarily the case, but that preventative presence, and then the idea that there are cameras and alarms and silent alarms under the bank teller's desk, those kinds of things, prevent crime just as well as incapacitation methods like arrest and seizure, because the person who robs a bank obviously knows they could be arrested, and that has not deterred them, right? The police also have the division of labor where they have the response, and security has the real true prevention of crime in their industrial space. This allows each one to really concentrate on a single type of labor, where the police practice public safety and security practices protective services, right? But police use police presence to prevent crime all the time. And in fact, the old park the patrol car somewhere near a freeway off to the side with no one in it at night is pretty common here in the state of Michigan, where you'd be going down I-75 and you will see a Michigan State Police car parked kind of off in the distance off the freeway. And you think, okay, there could be someone in there running radar and I'm going to get a ticket, I better slow down. But in most cases, you will go back there in 10 hours and the car will still be there. So it's not always security that does the preventative work. There's also the interesting phenomenon of security police, which is a term that's used here where I am, and there are other terms for it. But there are places where security personnel are given arrest powers within a certain geography. So perhaps in a hospital or at a stadium, they're given arrest powers, and that's kind of a crossover kind of a thing. So the division of labor model is a little bit closer. I think it's a little bit easier than the geography one. There's less exceptions, but we still have exceptions. So the division of labor model doesn't necessarily work when you're working with the police, where you can say, you do your stuff and we'll do our stuff. And in the property model, you'll do your stuff in your space and we'll do our stuff in our space. You still got that really fine, division between the two that doesn't exist in reality. Now, oftentimes, police departments normally have this competing forces model in their head, quite frankly, and maybe with good reason in some cases. But basically, the competing forces model says both the police and security have similar capacity to prevent and respond to crime, meaning that police functions could easily be privatized. We have seen this in corrections. Prisons have been privatized now for at least a dozen years, and have been done so with pretty good success, quite frankly. There are the horror stories, but for the most part, privatized prisons operate as well as those that were public in the past. The prisoners' rights are taken care of in the same way, and the cost has generally come down. Maybe not as much as anticipated when they were first privatized, but the cost has come down. And the complexity is certainly down for the state which doesn't have to directly run these institutions. So police departments could be done the same way. The police cite a couple of things, one of them being training and professionalism. If you're going to do that, you're not going to get the same level of training and professionalism. I think we can dispute that simply by saying if you hire the right person and you give them the right training and they have the right skill set, then whether they work for company A or the city of B, it really doesn't matter. They're going to have the same level of professionalism and training, right? It's the same. This is a measurable, right? Police also see the business influence as a corrupting force, and that may have some merit in that company A takes over police services from city B. And here's an example. In the inner city is a very congested place. And so company A decides we're not going to send our patrol cars in during the high traffic areas because we can pay less for our auto insurance for our fleet if we do that. If we promise our insurance company we're not going to be driving in the inner city during rush hour, we're only going to be out in the suburbs during rush hour, we'll only go into the city when it's calmer, when it's late at night, we have less chance of having an auto accident, therefore we'll make some extra money because we'll pay less in premiums and we'll have more profit. And that could be a corrupting force because you wouldn't do your job because there is the idea that you could save money if you did your job differently. At the same time, private security says, wait a minute, there's a value proposition here. And if we can do it cheaper with the same level of training and professionalism, which is a bit of a tough argument to really make, then why shouldn't we consider that? And by the way, police departments, you've been in existence for hundreds of years now. And although the crime has gone down in some places, in other places it's gone up. So your training and professionalism has had very little impact on the level of crime in some areas. So therefore, why not privatize if you're going to get the same results when it comes to the level of crime? Now, these competing forces model create a very tough relationship between local police and security people because they see the security people as coming in to try to tell them how to do their job and perhaps try to take some of their job away. If it weren't for the private security people, then we would have more to do out at factories in the industrial areas. Therefore, they're taking our job away. And this competing forces model is one that creates a lot of angst between the two. And it's not a model I would suggest that you try to further. But it is a model of operation between police departments and security departments that you need to be aware of. Now, the supplementary service model is interesting because police departments tend to like this model, and it may not be such a bad model for security either in some ways. It assumes that private security is subordinate to police. Both have a job to do, but private security cannot take the place and supplant the police. Okay? The training and the powers of police cannot be delegated to private security according to this model, right? The police have the training, the police have the authority to arrest. Private security does not have that, therefore we could do without security. We couldn't do without police. Therefore, security is subordinate to the police. Even though it does enhance things, it's a supplement to police services. But it should only be used where it would be ineffective to use police. Where doing so, if you had to put police at, inside of every shopping mall, then they wouldn't be able to go out to the inner city, and which is where most of the crime would potentially be. So you should only use private security where it supplements and where it's good for the police. Lower level tasks. But if we look at the supplementary service model, think about nuclear security functions. Most of those are privatized. The Department of Energy has privatized most nuclear security. And that is a very technical security function. You have a great deal of training, not just on the safety, the nuclear safety side, but the use of force side and the anti-terrorism side. And we supplant the police for specially trained security all the time, even executive protection. And if you think about executive protection in terms of we're protecting a senator's wife, and we do that with the Secret Service. And if the senator's wife were to be harmed, it would make the news, and it would be a very bad thing. But we use private security to protect our big business leaders, our Bill Gates, our Warren Buffetts. And if we're doing that and something happens to one of them, it could definitely impact the economy of the U.S. It could cripple the economy if 2 or 3 major business leaders were harmed. It would look like a coup by those who are anti-capitalism, and therefore it would cripple us financially. So we supplant the police and public security with private security all the time in very critical matters So I don't know if the supplementary service model in theory, where it says one is subordinate to the other, I'm not so sure that that is defendable in that case. Although operating in that model and operating with the police department under those assumptions is complementary to the police department. And if you're okay with saying, yep, you're in charge here, we're just here to help you be successful, it plays well to the audience. So this model is one that might be preferred, but you do have to be relatively humble, and you should understand that in reality, the model is not as cut and dried as they would have you believe it to be, that security is indeed supplementary to police, whereas it's probably more equal but separate from. So many security and police organizations operate in the ad hoc partnership model, which means basically we will help you when you need help and vice versa. But other than that, we are separate. And this is a good model for police in that private security may have more power than the police when it comes to their assigned jurisdictional area. And by that I mean, for instance, I have information on everyone who works for my company that the police cannot have without a warrant. I have the ability to interview people without them walking away, because I can tell them that their participation in my interview/interrogation is not voluntary, and if indeed they don't cooperate, and if indeed they're not truthful, then they will at a minimum lose their job. The police cannot use that. They can't tell you. They can tell you you have the right to remain silent. I tell people that you don't have the right to remain silent, even though they do. But because I'm not a person who is able to recommend prosecution, they don't really have the right to remain silent with me. I can punish them in terms of termination or other work-related punishments if they don't cooperate with me. So I have, in that case, more power than the police do. These relationships are normally formalized in that they're used for emergency response normally. So the ad hoc partnership says that if indeed we have a workplace shooting in one of my facilities, then I already have a working relationship with the police. They do not need a warrant to enter the premises. They can go here, they can go there, but they also know where they shouldn't go for their own safety and what areas will be locked down so that even the gunman could probably not get to them. And then they have even keys, if you will, or access cards to get into the facilities. So we have an ad hoc partnership model so that the police can supplement security in the event of a workplace incident. We seldom see that go the other way, but it could. There could be an agreement that a city may sign with a security company to say that the security company will provide people to do courthouse security in the event of a high-profile trial, where you're not going to bring more police in, but you would bring private security in. And then when that relationship is over, and you go back to the separate, do your job, swim in your lane, do your division of labor and property-based separation. But you have these ad hoc partnerships. Those, again, can be very fruitful for a security organization, but they are normally task-based. You're very strict about when you're going to have that type of relationship, and it's very formalized. So in all that talk about how we work with police, the one model that everybody says, this is the great model, it's the combined forces model. It's based on true cooperation. There's information sharing between the two entities. It's very attractive to private security because DHS, for instance, gives me a lot of intel information on chemicals of interest. Local police will tell me if someone that's working in one of my factories is the suspect in a very serious investigation. The access, it's normally public information or information that a police officer could lawfully disclose as part of their investigative process to protect the public. But it's not something that I would normally happen upon if I didn't ask. If I didn't have that type of relationship that they would call me and say, hey, this is what's going on, right? It's attractive to the police. It provides access to intelligence on personnel that might not be uncovered in an investigation. Connections through relationships. So let's say the CEO of a company, his wife is murdered. And the police really don't know, and they don't have a suspect. But, back at the company, the security guy may say, yes, well, the CEO is having an affair with his secretary, so I'd be looking to see whether she owns a handgun. because she's the jealous type, and she's madly in love, and we all know this. That type of relationship would not be known to the police until they went through a great deal of investigation, and frankly, if the CEO is very careful, they may take months to uncover the fact that he was unfaithful and that his girlfriend may be a suspect in his wife's murder. Whereas, if they were to talk to the security department, they would be able to tell them right away, well, the guy is a bit of a player, right? And that type of relationship is attractive to police because they can cut to the chase. If they have a good in, if you will, with the security manager at a company, and someone working at that company has a behavioral issue, they can go to the security manager and say, hey, what do you know about this guy? And they can get normally, quote unquote, off the record information about the person that will help them form their investigation and ask the right questions. Therein lies the rub. The whole based on true cooperation, the holding hands, we're going to share information, we're going to work together, is something that may be promoted by the police side. But there is a trapdoor in this that you need to be aware of that might harm you, is that it can easily turn into the next model. And that is the unholy alliance model. When there's true combinations of the two functions and everybody's working together, but there's a detrimental effect. And that is the full sharing of information normally is the problem. Right? I can't necessarily share all my business information with the police unless they have a warrant or they compel me legally to do so. I should not try to cover up things. I should not destroy evidence. Do nothing illegal. But at the same time, your alliance, if you will, you are a paid entity for the shareholders of a company or for the owner of a company, and you must protect them in any legal way. So therefore, me sharing that the CEO may have a girlfriend without a formal compelling reason to do so, such as I'm being interviewed by the police, would be harmful to the stockholders, perhaps, because the CEO, now seen as someone who is a player, if you will, now the shareholders may say, we're vulnerable. He may have shared information with this woman or other women. He's put himself in a position where he could be blackmailed by someone, and maybe that's happening, and maybe the blackmailer is getting company information. There are a lot of reasons that the shareholders would not want this information to get out. You can't hide it, but you don't have to offer it. And when you go from that first model, the combined forces model, where everybody's working hand in hand, into an unholy alliance model where you're sharing information that you're not compelled to share, can become problematic. Now, the way around that is when someone asks you about someone, you can share what you know to be true, right? Not rumor, but know to be true, if indeed you get the clearance from your legal department to do so. Or you can say, you know what, I will make sure that I have all that information ready for you and preserved and ready to go, but you're probably going to need to get a warrant for that. And most police departments will understand what you're trying to say. It is not stonewalling. And you see that on the TV shows that the security guy from a big company is trying to stonewall the police. It's not stonewalling. They understand that you need to get the I's dotted, the T's crossed with warrants or subpoenas for information. And so basically you're just saying that you're going to preserve the information. Now, when police start to work security jobs on the side, this unholy alliance model can become a real problem. I did have a facility in the U.S., I won't say where when we took over the facility, it was an acquisition, all of the security people were off-duty police officers, all of them. And ironically, they were working 10, 12-hour shifts at the police department and then 10, 12-hour shifts for me, and they were doing it 5 days a week. Well, the math adds up to under 24 hours in a day, but there wasn't any sleep time in there, and my guess is that they were sleeping some on my time and some on the police, and probably more on mine. At the same time, this was a major employer in that city, and the police were using all of the employment records they had access to in their investigations work as well. They knew things about people that they wouldn't have normally known without access to sensitive information. So it may corrupt both sides. And so you have to be very careful when you combine forces that there is some separation based on the property or the division of labor or some other model that, a formality with the ad hoc partnership model, some formality, a formal contract between the two about what can and cannot be shared, because that unholy alliance can become an extreme legal trapdoor for you and get you in a lot of trouble, to include your arrest, if you share personally protected information with the police without the due process of going through warrants and subpoenas and other legal instruments to get that information. So, be careful of the unholy alliance. That's a model that the police may like because they benefit from it more so than any other model, because it's almost carte blanche for company information. But as the security manager, it's one you should avoid at all costs. And if that unholy alliance model tends to grow, you have to be bold enough to step in its way and say, no, we can't have that. We can't have off-duty police working in our facility that have jurisdiction within the same city as the facility is located, because they have access to information that they could use in their other job. There has to be that division. And so this model is one that may be very advantageous to police departments, very disadvantageous to security departments. So Sari and Presler come up with their own model that they proposed in 2000. And it basically says that police have more authority, but private security can have more impact on crime prevention. And it's really kind of a sharing kind of a thing. But their big premise is that the police and private security interactions should be more regulated. And they say this because it's good for the public, right? The maximum public benefit could eliminate the corruption side and increase the cooperative nature of the two entities for better public benefit. And I would counter that with saying that although that is true and we should all as human beings work for the public benefit, we are duty bound in the private security industry to work for a private benefit as well. We're being paid by someone to watch over their interests. And if we were to do things that were strictly for the public benefit and not consider the fact that we have a private contract and responsibility, then we are going against what we said we were going to do and the reason we said we were going to do it. So I'm not ever suggesting that someone shouldn't do something for the public benefit. But there are rules in place to protect private entities as well. And if something is important enough to protect the public benefit, then the police can get the proper legal sign-off from a judge, from a court, to say that they need to have information or authority to do something. And if it is truly for the public benefit, there are entities that will decide that that is true, and they will compel you to do it, and you should readily do it and be ready to provide any information and do so with full gusto and a big smile on your face. But you have to understand that the regulated intersections model really is based on maximum public benefit, and the security model is not a public entity in most cases. So there's a little bit of an issue there too. So we've looked at all the models, and all the models at least that were mentioned by Sari and Presler. And now what I'd like you to do is to look at the discussion for this week and think about some things that might impact which side you come down on. So the discussion questions are posted, and it's very specific about what I want in paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3. But I want you to think about, as you're writing it, which model do you think is most accurate? When you think about the police department and a security department in the town you live in today or the one you grew up in, which do you think is most accurate? Do you think that there is, great ad hoc, very formalized agreements between private security and police departments on who will do what? Do you think that they are separated simply, you stay in your swim lane and we'll stay in ours? There's division of labor or a property line. Do you think that there's an unholy alliance in some cases? And maybe there is, quite frankly. But just as a private citizen, I kind of be interested a little bit in what your thoughts are on it. Which of the models do you really prefer? Which one would you think would be best for you, knowing your own personality? Could you work in? Could you work in a model where you are subordinate to the police, and although you may or may not believe that to be true, you allow them to believe that that's the operating model that you want to be in? If your personality says, no, I can't operate in a model that I just don't believe in, and I want very formal ad hoc, or I want, one of the other models, I just want a division of labor model where you do your stuff and we do ours, and we only come to each other when we absolutely need to. If that is your personality, then that is probably the best model for you to work in. You shouldn't work out one that's going to be too hard for you to accept, from your own ethical standpoint, of course. think about whether the cooperation, the integrity, and the willingness of the other party matter. And by that I mean, if you're in a city where you have a police department that is above reproach, it has always been top notch. You have very well trained officers. They are very much public servants, as they all should be, but very much so in this city. Is it easier or harder, or would you change your model as opposed to one that is a police department that has been riddled with corruption over time, that is known to be a corrupt police department? And there are departments in the United States, and we all can name a few, that have that reputation, earned or unearned. But does it matter what model you as a security manager might employ with that police department? Should you be more of a formal, or should you be an informal? Should you have a closer relationship, or one that's standoffish based on the things you know about the police department? And then, is there really a best model? Is one of these models, or in some combination of these models, are they really best? And I want you to kind of talk a little bit about that, especially in paragraph 3. Which model or parts of models do you think work best between cooperation between a security department where you would be the security manager and a police department that you would need to work with locally to get your job done? So very much a philosophical discussion this week, and no right or wrong answers. And there'll be some disagreement, and as always, do it collegially, and it's okay to disagree, and I don't think there is a right answer. There are a few wrong answers in that, if you said that I wanted to have an unholy alliance with the corrupt police department, I think I'd probably say you might want to try to think about a different major, but there's very few ways that you can't match these things up. So, enjoy the philosophical discussion, if you will. It's okay to say, I think, and in my opinion, or I don't think I could work in this model because of this or that. It's great to say that, and I really want to open up this discussion wide open this week. You've already done the reading if you've done this correctly, and you just listened to the lecture, so thank you very much for that. So the discussion, the initial discussion, just like the last one we did before this week's quiz, was due on Thursday night, and then responses due by Sunday. There'll be 2 minimum responses, right? We all know what that means, right? 11:59 is the end of each day for me. I can't add midnight with the software, so 11:59 is the cutoff. But make sure you have your initial done by Thursday night, so that gives everybody a chance to look at those, to make their comments, and potentially get them done before they take the weekend off, or they can do them over the weekend. But if you wait till Sunday to put your initial post in, it doesn't give anybody a chance to look them over and make any kind of meaningful comments. So you're really not helping the class move forward. And that unfortunately has to reflect in my grading. So initial discussion by Thursday, responses due by Sunday night. I will be joining in, as I said in last week's, or I believe in the directions for this week now that I think about it. If I respond to you in a discussion and you respond back to me, your response back to me counts as one of your responses. That's not a problem. That's I've had some interesting discussions with a few of you in the discussion board early in the week, and I will continue to engage early in the week. As the week gets later, I engage less and less because there are more people that have put out their initial post for you to respond to, so you have more options, more people to talk to. Plus, if you're going to wait till after Thursday to post it, then it is what it is. Nobody wants to wait that long to see it. So again, Thursday night initials, Sunday night for everything. If you respond back and forth with me, that's part of a conversation that counts. So don't be afraid to respond back to me and tell me that I'm wrong about something, because I really enjoy those responses. With that, have a great week. If you have questions, you all know how to find me now. I think I've talked to most of you, if not all. And if anybody has questions, I've opened up the grading so you can see where you stand week to week to week with each assignment that's graded. So if you have questions about your grade, please reach out to me. I would prefer to do those conversations by phone. They're just too much back and forth sometimes, unless something needs to be memorialized in writing. So if you have a question about grades, please just reach out and let's schedule a conversation. And with that, have a great week, and we will see you on campus. Actually, I will be on campus the 29th and 30th of this month. I'll put more on next week's lecture about that if you would like to come in and see me during extended office hours while I'm in town.